Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, examining how Hitler's consolidation of power might have been helped by successful policies. In this presentation, I'm going to focus on his successful foreign policy. Because if unemployment worried Germans more than anything else, it was the Treaty of Versailles, the Treaty of Shame, that hurt their pride in being German the most. And in looking at what Hitler did, I'm going to seize on the opportunity to discuss what the different plebiscites the Nazis held have to tell us. Now, something to bear in mind. Much as Germans hated the Treaty of Versailles, they feared another war almost as much. And Streseman's policy of fulfilment had shown that the threat of war didn't have to be the only way to get the Treaty of Versailles revised. But when Hitler withdrew Germany from the League of Nations near the end of 1933, war seemed a long way off. The League was still treating Germany unequally, unfairly. At least that's the way Germans saw it. And walking out of the League was popular with most Germans. Yes, in the plebiscite that followed, Goebbels embarked on an intensive propaganda campaign, and there was a good deal of intimidation employed too. None of these things were employed universally, but those who had refused to vote could be arrested. In some polling stations, the voting was not secret, as papers were numbered, or else blank papers were filled in by returning officers, or spoiled papers would be counted as yes votes. And where voting was secret, the presence of Nazis at polling stations pressured many to vote openly, so that their positive vote was seen. Now, if voting had been free, it's pretty certain that the Nazis would have still had a clear majority. But nothing like the majority they got. The more left-wing SPD voters and KPD voters would most likely have voted no. As it was, 88% voted yes, 5% voted no, with 3.5 million spoiled ballots. Now, actually, the next plebiscite in August 1934 was not a result of Hitler's foreign policy, but was an indicator of his popularity, because it asked the people of Germany to approve the merging of the offices of Chancellor and President, which they did with an 89.9% yes vote. But this did mean 5 million voted no, or else spoiled their paper. And in some places, Hamburg and Berlin as examples, the yes vote was less than 75%. It was in fact a disappointing result for Hitler and the Nazis. Polling stations had been surrounded by brown shirts, and clubs and societies had been marched en masse to vote. In some polling stations, all the ballot papers were already marked yes, and spoiled papers counted as yes votes. What's more, in some constituencies, the numbers of votes counted exceeded the electorate. The Saar referendum at the beginning of 1935 was a more straightforward affair for the Nazis. The people of the Saar were asked whether they wanted to return to Germany, join France, or remain under the League. Their experience under French control had not been a good one. The French were seen as imperialists, and there had been support for a yes vote across the political spectrum. Though belatedly, SPD and KPD activists, still able to function to some degree in the region, campaigned for a no vote. The region was overwhelmingly Catholic, and the Catholic Church was already having a hard time in Nazi Germany. But Saar Catholics favoured joining with Germany, There was a genuine fear of Bolshevism, continued French exploitation, and with it, high unemployment. But the Nazis left nothing to chance in their propaganda campaign. German patriotism in the region was raised through war memorials and national festivals, and there was a strong campaign with millions of leaflets, a radio campaign with the cheap people's receivers flooded into the region, and 1,500 public meetings were held. Saarlanders living in Germany were brought home to vote, and the Nazis also offered economic inducements to the people of the region for a yes vote. There was violent intimidation too, with SS units sent into the region, and threats that no voters would be sent to concentration camps. There were international monitors overseeing the vote, and they called for the violence to stop. But the soldiers on the ground had no sympathy for either the socialists or the communists. And in any case, most workers were Germans first and foremost, and were not put off by what had already happened in Nazi Germany. The vote, with 91% favouring a return to Germany, was a genuine expression of German nationalism. Now, in March 1936, there was not only another plebiscite, this time to approve the remilitarization of the Rhineland, but there was a mock election too, with just one list of candidates. There had been a genuine fear of war, but with the military occupation of the Rhineland a success, there was genuine national euphoria. Hitler had restored German sovereignty over the border region, a border with hated France. In the process, he had stood up to Britain as well as France and defied the hated Treaty of Versailles. There was a 98.9% yes vote. And yes, the usual intimidatory tactics were employed, and the Nazis were getting better at employing them. But Hitler was by now very popular, and a big yes vote would have been the outcome anyway. It was the same with the vote on the Anschluss in 1938, which was again coupled with a sham election, except for one very important thing. Also coupled to it was a personal vote of confidence in Hitler, so a no vote would be seen as treasonable. Nothing was left to chance. Austrian socialists had long been in favour of unification, but in any case their leadership had been driven into exile, or else were in prison. Still, and this according to Gestapo reports, genuine support for unification, in Vienna at least, was probably no more than a third of the population. Known opponents of the regime were arrested beforehand, and those who refused to vote or declared they would vote no were beaten, forced to parade around the streets with placards hung around their necks declaring, "I am a traitor to the people," and dragged into pubs where they would be abused. Some were thrown into lunatic asylums. People were forced out of their homes to vote. Mobile polling stations visited sick people at home. Again, in some polling stations there were specially marked ballot papers, so it was not a secret ballot, or else a rumour that they had been marked was enough to enforce compliance. In others, voting was conducted in full view, or else ballot papers were already marked yes. All tried and trusted methods, but ultimately no votes were simply discounted. Little surprise then that there was a 99% yes vote. There was another plebiscite after the invasion of the Sudetenland, this time just for the Sudetenlanders, with the same result. Now, though it was necessary for the Nazis to secure ridiculous yes votes in these different plebiscites, that they would have secured majorities anyway is hardly in doubt. Hitler grew and grew in popularity, never convincing the diehards amongst the SPD, KPD and Catholic votes, but by the time he stood in Paris, conqueror of France, he was the most popular politician amongst his own people on the planet. And he was very secure in power. Now, a few favours to ask you. If you're finding my videos useful, do please give them a thumbs up and sign up to my channel if you haven't already. And do please tell your friends about them. Spread the word for me. But for now, let me thank you so much for listening and wish you the very best of luck in your studies. Cheers.